Once, long ago in the Australian bush, there was a frog named Tiddalik who grew very, very thirsty. The dry season had arrived early that year, and the once abundant streams and rivers had already begun to shrink. Tiddalik, feeling the heat and dryness more than ever, hopped around in search of water, determined to quench his thirst. But as he drank, he was gripped by a strange feeling, a fierce desire not only to satisfy his thirst, but to drink every last drop he could find. So Tiddalik drank and drank. He drank from the streams until they ran dry, from the rivers until only cracked earth remained, from the lakes until nothing but parched mud was left. Even the smallest waterholes he drained completely. His thirst seemed unquenchable, and he kept gulping down the water until he grew so swollen that his skin was stretched tight, his body a great, round mass filled with all the life-giving water that once sustained the land. As Tiddalik sat, bloated and sluggish, the once vibrant bushland around him began to wither. The trees, once tall and green, lost their leaves and stood bare and skeletal. The grasses, once a soft carpet, turned yellow and brittle. Flowers that once painted the landscape in brilliant colors shriveled up, leaving a desolate scene of dry, lifeless soil. The once lively animal sounds fell silent, and an eerie stillness spread across the land. In their despair, the animals began to gather, parched and desperate, trying to understand what had happened to all the water. They whispered to one another, pointing with trembling paws and beaks, until their eyes fell upon Tiddalik, who sat lazily in a cool patch of shade, his enormous belly round with the water they all needed. His skin glistened from the moisture within, a sight that filled the animals with fury. The animals, led by a brave kangaroo, approached Tiddalik, crying out and begging him to release the water back into the land.
Please, Tiddalik. We are all dying of thirst. Our homes, our families, our very lives depend on the water you've taken.
But Tiddalik, feeling smug and comfortable, ignored their cries. He closed his heavy eyelids halfway, enjoying the power he held over the land. His greed had brought him satisfaction, but at a terrible cost to everyone else. Realizing they couldn't reason with him, the animals grew anxious and held a meeting to decide what to do. They gathered in the clearing, each animal expressing their worry. The wise owl, who had seen many seasons and knew much of the land's stories, finally spoke up.
Tiddalik may be stubborn, but even frogs cannot hold in water when they laugh. If we can make him laugh, the water will spill out, and the land will be saved.
The animals looked around at each other with a mixture of hope and doubt. It was a daunting task, but the stakes were too high to give up without trying. They decided they would each attempt to make Tiddalik laugh, even if it meant making complete fools of themselves. They gathered in a great circle around the bloated frog, who glanced at them with disinterest. First, the emu stepped forward. She stretched her long neck, fluffed her feathers, and began to perform an exaggerated dance, kicking up her legs and flapping her wings in a way that looked absolutely ridiculous. The other animals chuckled, but Tiddalik just watched, his face as still as stone. Next, the kangaroo bounded in, attempting all sorts of acrobatic moves. He somersaulted, spun, and even tried to balance on his tail. The animals held their breath, thinking surely this display would crack Tiddalik's stern expression. But the bloated frog simply blinked, showing no sign of laughter. One after another, the animals tried to amuse Tiddalik, each more desperate than the last. The wombat tried standing on his head, the cockatoo did an absurd impression of a pelican, and even the platypus performed a wobbly dance with her beak held high in the air. The animals laughed among themselves, but Tiddalik was unmoved, his face blank as he sat there, seemingly unamused by their efforts. Finally, the animals began to lose hope, their spirits as dry as the land around them. Just when they were about to give up, a small, unassuming eel named Nabunum slithered forward. The other animals hadn't thought much of Nabunum, but he was determined to try his best. He slid into the center of the clearing and began twisting himself into the most unusual shapes. He tied himself into a tight knot, then unraveled himself, only to twist again into a figure so strange and tangled that the other animals couldn't help but giggle. At last, Nabunum did something truly bizarre. He twisted himself into a figure 8, then back again, then into a lopsided knot that made him look like a clumsy, flopping pretzel. Finally, a deep, rumbling chuckle escaped from Tiddalik. His stern face cracked, and with a loud belly laugh, the water he had been holding inside began to pour from his mouth. At first, it was just a trickle, but then, with each laugh, more water gushed forth until it became a river, flooding the dry earth around him. The plants revived, the trees regained their leaves, and the bush burst back into color and life. The animals cheered and splashed in the water, their thirst finally quenched, grateful to Nabunum for his brave, absurd, and ultimately life-saving antics. From that day on, Tiddalik remembered the consequences of his greed. He learned to take only what he needed, sharing the land's precious resources with everyone. And that wraps up our story for today. If you liked it, watch the video on your screen right now. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.